Bryan Colter here, Evolutionary Astrologer, for another horoscope report for the upcoming Pisces full moon that happens in just a couple days on August 30th. And this will highlight the core evolutionary intentions for the next couple weeks. I still have an ongoing sale on my website, 15% off any of my classes. I'll put a link above if you're interested. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into the astrology of this. Here is the chart, and as you can see, we have this Pisces full moon where the moon in Pisces is opposite this Virgo sun. Here we are in Virgo season, and really the most important thing we want to focus on here for this event is the Saturn being in Pisces. Now, this became very important to talk about back in early March when Saturn entered this sign. Saturn will continue to be in this sign until early 2026, I think February, when it will finally enter into Aries. Saturn represents a couple things. For starters, it represents a challenge we must rise to, in this case as a collective. We'll talk about how to work with Saturn on a more personal level during this time, but the nature of the great challenge is that it's difficult to navigate, and Saturn likes to create certain blockages and limitations and likes to slow things down. And it says, okay, I'm really going to challenge you here to accomplish this. And then the second thing it represents is the great work of the collective. Like, what are we here to learn? What's the lesson here? Yes, there's a great challenge. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. But then here's the ultimate goal. Okay, here's what we're trying to learn. Now, ultimately, Saturn is about learning on a certain level because it's the planet of wisdom and maturation. So we as a collective are trying to wisen up in regards to the archetypal field of Pisces. And then there's a third component, regardless of what planet or sign we're talking about, where we talk about the prescription. And this is very much the lifeblood of this style of astrology known as evolutionary astrology. Okay, in Saturn's case, here's a challenge, here's the great work, but how do we actually work with it proactively? What's the prescription? Okay, we'll get to that more later. To enter into our understanding of what this primary challenge is for us, we want to first understand the nature of Saturn and the nature of Pisces, because these symbols really could not be more different than each other. Because Saturn has this very much reality checkish energy associated with it. It's of this dense dimension, okay? If you go through a big Saturn event in your life, we've all been there. For example, we all have our first Saturn return around the age of 29, thereabouts. It's a reality checkish time. It's a major pivot point in our life from the cycle of youth into the cycle of midlife. And many people will go through hardship and challenge during their Saturn return. If you have any good Saturn return stories, share them in the comments below. I'm sure there's a bunch of them, So it does bring about that sort of groundedness. It's like, okay, here's what you thought or felt or believed or thought reality was, and it's time to wisen up. So synchronistically, when you're going through Saturnian times, you will attract to yourself people, events, circumstances, whatever, that will bring you back into that realism, will cause you to grow up, and usually have to go through growing pains during a Saturn time. So it is very dense in that way. There's a certain heaviness associated with Saturn. Saturn was quite strong in 2020 and 2021 as it was conjuncting Pluto in the sky. We all felt the heaviness, the control, the repression, this pressure cooker energy as I described it during those years. We all felt the weight of Saturn then when Saturn was at its absolute maximum. So there is this sort of, we could use the word density. It's not exactly right, but it's a useful way of framing it, and associated with Saturn. Very much of this third dimension. Meanwhile, Pisces, the mystic archetype, also Pisces is a water sign. All water signs are associated with the emotional plane, our subjective reality, our feelings. And our emotions exist in a higher dimension of reality. So Saturn of this dimension, water signs of higher dimensions. And in the case of Pisces, we could even make the argument it's even higher. Some astrologers. I've heard them use the element of ether for Pisces instead of water. I really like that because it is a reference to working with energy in higher dimensions. So again, these symbols couldn't be more different from each other. And there is a great challenge when we talk about, Saturnian challenges. One of the challenges with Pisces is kind of getting caught up in illusory states or in delusion or deception. Addiction is another big one. The challenge of addiction is, of course, very prevalent nowadays. That's continued to be a major theme over the next couple years. But now we wrestle with this idea of illusion. And Saturn in Pisces, the great challenge, if I had to reduce it to a single sentence, is the blurring of the lines between what is real, Saturn, and what is not real, Pisces. Okay. Now there's beautiful truth and realness with Pisces. We're talking about more the challenge, or how can it trip us up. We'll talk about the positive qualities of Pisces a little bit later. That gets more into the prescriptive astrology. So the blurring of lines between what is real and not real. This is something I talked about back in March when Saturn entered Pisces. Just last night, actually, synchronistically, I was listening to a podcast. The name of the podcast is The Sean Ryan Show. Very great interviews on there. If anybody's interested, I highly recommend it. And he was interviewing a guest. I forget the gentleman's name, but the owner of the Skinwalker Ranch. It's a very famous ranch in Utah, I believe, which has been thoroughly documented to have very strange phenomenon going on there. I think there's actually a docu-series on TV about Skinwalker Ranch. A bunch of UFO sightings. They have something called a triangle there, much like the Bermuda Triangle, actually, where there's weird phenomena going on, where one dimension of reality seems to be blurring into another dimension of reality. And this guy who owns the ranch purchased it about 7 years ago with the core intention of disproving, all this weird, folklorish tales I hear about this ranch. I'll figure it out for myself. So he came in as a hardcore skeptic to scientifically study the so-called phenomenon on this ranch to ultimately disprove it. That was his mission. And he had plenty of money to buy it and to do that on his own coin. And he tells stories in that interview on the podcast that is kind of mind-blowing. It's like, whoa, crazy. People getting physically ill out of the blue, especially when they're digging into the earth at that location. Many UFO sightings when they're studying that triangle, as he called it, things disappearing in the sky. Their electronic devices doing very bizarre things, like the colors of the screens changing, and GPS doing bizarre things, again, much like the Bermuda Triangle. And the most fascinating story out of that podcast, when he was talking about his head scientist, also a hardcore skeptic, doing these studies there was one day or evening when he got really frustrated, and he almost was getting driven a little bit crazy because he had, all the physicists that go there are completely baffled by the phenomenon happening on that ranch, and the head scientist as well. And out of a moment of frustration, he yelled out and said, "What's going on? If you have something to tell me now," kind of screaming at the sky in his own insanity, because everything that was happening made no sense. And in that instant, when he screamed that out, his device in his hand began to morph and change color, and text began to appear on the screen, and it said, "I living." Whoa, spooky story. And what's even crazier is, as I'm telling the story, when I said in that instant, my camera went out and it died. You won't see that in the edit of this video, but it's like I'm telling this spooky story about consciousness phenomenon on the ranch associated with electronics, and synchronistically my camera died right when I said that. Pretty strange, okay? So the blurring of the lines between what is real and not real, and for that hardcore skeptic scientist, he was confronted with that. We use that as a metaphor for the great challenge that the collective is facing over the next few years. Not necessarily about, UFO and weird phenomenon, although that's going to be a part of it, I feel, but just inching ever closer to truth, cutting through delusion and illusion and all those falsehoods, more to a truth that's in alignment with what's actually going on. Saturn in Pisces, the great challenge. And in the story of that ranch, they're doing a literal scientific study of consciousness, basically, or about consciousness. That's one key component about it. Meanwhile, Saturn, which does have this more pragmatic, scientific, realistic energy, let's prove it with these physical instruments of this dense dimension. And here it is in the sign of consciousness of Pisces. So it's a beautiful metaphor. And again, I just heard this interview last night, synchronistically. And as I said, early March, Saturn entered Pisces, more or less coinciding with Pluto entering Aquarius. So these energies are kind of fused together. Saturn, a more 3-year cycle in the sign, whereas Pluto in Aquarius is basically 2 decades. And back in March and the next couple months after, as Pluto was in Aquarius, we got a sneak preview of the next 2 decades. And I said it on this channel before that even happened. Pay close attention to these next few months, because we're getting a sneak preview of what the next couple decades will be like. And we take the same principle, Saturn and Pisces, in blurring the lines between what is real and what isn't. Combining that with Aquarius, which is basically about technological evolution like we've never seen before, and we've seen a lot already, but you ain't seen nothing yet. That's a good way of describing Pluto and Aquarius. Combining that integratively with Saturn and Pisces, think about technology that blurs the lines, like AI face filters. Making people appear different than they actually are, as if they're in full makeup, for example, beautifying themselves using technology. Or, deep fake videos and audio where technology can recreate someone's, their voice or even what they look like, or both. And that's still in its infancy stage, even though it's very impressive already. It's going to be a great challenge. There's something else I've seen floating around on the net where people go on these websites or apps and they pretend to be NPC characters, where if somebody donates them money, they'll do a certain action. And for the really popular ones, these people are making like $6,000 a day just doing these actions for people whenever somebody gives them money. It's very surreal to watch those videos. I don't know if you've seen them, but check it out. Pretty weird. And back in March, Pluto entered Pluto entered Aquarius. AI was in the news everywhere, giving us that sneak preview, exploded onto the scene. And you're looking on Instagram, let's say, it's like, oh wait, is this beautiful piece of art I'm looking at created by a digital artist, or is it AI generated? I don't know the difference between what is real and what isn't. Or is this a human being I'm talking to online, or an AI bot? Or is this AI I'm talking to through ChatGPT giving me actual truth? Or is it giving me information skewed by the beliefs of the humans that created the thing, programmed it? Also, what's going on with all these UFO whistleblowers that came out right around when Pluto entered Aquarius? Part of this rapid evolution in technology, perhaps, ... We're just observing reality, and that's what astrology does. It's a finger pointing at reality, and we just see what's going on. We observe. That, too, will probably be a very important thing over the coming years, blurring the lines between what is real and what isn't. Have you seen all those holograms they use where they recreate Tupac or Whitney Houston and they're literally there on stage before your eyes in holographic form? Whoa, technology, illusion. So these are the sorts of realities, so to speak, that we will, as a collective, will be faced with. We are facing it, but it's going to get even more intense and confusing. And this sort of experience, again, connecting it back to the Saturnian challenge, is disorienting. Disorientation is a great challenge because of this. Remember how in the movie Matrix, when Neo was first learning the truth, he was so disoriented, he became nauseous, he vomited. And we're in a version of the Matrix now. And that's what it feels like for many of us. And this is only the beginning. It will get much, much stronger. So we talk a lot about the challenge here. Now let's ask a precious question, which is why? Why is this happening? There's the challenge, but what's this Saturnian great work? What's our mountain to climb? Why is it happening? Ultimately, because we as a collective need to, again, become more wise and mature. That's the ultimate goal with Saturn. But another component of this great work is we need to wake up from what? Pisces, the mystic, the dreamer archetypes. We need to wake up from the dream, the Maya, the illusion of this world, the Matrix. And the stakes are high because if we don't, we'll continue to careen down this more darker path of destruction that we've co-created with, 8 billion people or however many are here. So to cut through the illusion into truth, and the truth is out there, just to use one of my favorite lines from X-Files. So I've discussed the nature of the Saturnian challenge, the ultimate great work towards ultimate truth. But what about the prescription? This is where evolutionary astrology really excels. It's like, how do we work with these energies proactively to achieve, do our own small part to achieve this great work? Well, for that, we consider this full moon, which is obviously shining a big spotlight on the Saturn, which is the whole reason I've been talking about it. And since the moon is in Pisces, of course, we're in Virgo season. Sun is in Virgo because Pisces and Virgo are opposite signs. I have a pretty unique take on this polarity from most astrologers, I feel. I call this the axis of spiritual development, or raising one's consciousness as a core evolutionary intent. Yes, both Virgo and Pisces. Now, to be fair, all the signs of the zodiac are equally capable of evolving spiritually. That's not a value judgment there. And there's no reason to think of people who have strong Pisces or Virgo in their chart as more spiritually evolved as others. That's just a complete distortion. But when I talk about this axis of spiritual development or raising one's consciousness, it's just a primary focus for people who were born with these symbols quite strong in their own chart. That's my own take on this. Although Virgo isn't really perceived as a spiritual sign, Pisces is usually the sign referred to in that way. Virgo can be a very spiritual path because it's known as the servant archetype. And it doesn't mean to become subservient or, under the thumb of other people telling us what to do, but a spiritual path of service to others, salvation through good works, or how it's referred to in India as karma yoga, let's say. So the Virgo path can be very spiritual. So here's the metaphor. Imagine there's a man who works his job as a contractor to build homes for families. That's his day job. And that's how he makes his money. But then on a deeper level, what really makes him what drives him to do this work specifically, and why he considers it to be work that truly matters in the world, is because he feels on a deep level it's an act of service because of the looks on the family's faces as they light up when they see their dream home right before their eyes. He's made it real. He's built it with his own hands. And he sees the positive effect he's had in the lives of these families. That's what really drove him to do this work specifically. Meanwhile, on the weekends and weeknights, he donates his time as a baseball coach for young kids. And he's teaching them baseball and teamwork, but really what he's doing on a deeper level, and his intention is to instill into them wonderful values. As what? As an act of service. Virgo, the servant archetype. And even if he himself doesn't believe in a higher power, so to speak, or he doesn't believe he has a spiritual bone in his body, from my perspective, he's very spiritual and on the path because of how he chooses to live his life as these actions of service to others. And his spiritual evolution happens in this more practical, concrete, or we could say earthy way, because Virgo's an earth sign, where he's making his, let's say, giving nature, making it real in the world, whereas Pisces is more, transcendent, dealing with, connecting with angels and soul and God and prayer and meditation, and that's the more classical form of meditation, but they're both on the same axis of polarity, and all symbols, all signs that are opposed to each other, they're opposite sides of the same coin. And this is really the core of both these symbols, is spiritual development, although stylistically their ways of going about it are just very, very different. So one of the prescriptions for this month, during the full moon, highlighting this axis, is to enter into some form of spiritual service this month. And hopefully it can challenge you. That's the more Saturnian piece of this. Challenging yourself to give of yourself in certain ways where other people will benefit, further increasing your own spiritual development as a part of your internal, personal great work. And part of my service work, I have a Virgo moon, so this is something I focus on in my life, is I do a free weekly meditation every Sunday on Zoom. You're all invited. And it's my act of service, but it's the meditation itself that I do. It's called the Twin Hearts meditation, is a meditation of service because we focus on world peace. So I do it every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And depending on what time zone you're in, just do the math, look up what time is it in California, and then, figure out what that time is for you. And I'll put the Zoom link below in the show description, as well as I'll pin it at the top of the comments. You'll get the Zoom link there. I invite you to join us. We have a great time. We got a nice little tribe going there. Now, circling back to Saturn, again, it's about a challenge. It's about working hard to achieve goals. It's about consistency and regularity and devotion and committing to something. And we take these ideas, we apply it to the Piscean goal here, the prescription ultimately on the, from the angel's point of view of spiritual development during this time, because if you develop your consciousness to a high enough degree, you can see through the falsehood and the illusion to the truth. You can say, oh, that oasis isn't really there, It's the raising of one's consciousness ultimately is how you do that. So prescriptive astrology, working with Saturn and Pisces, is to commit to that, again, consistent spiritual practice. It really has to be practiced on the daily, but focused on particular kinds of practices through the spiritual vein, in the Saturnian vein, which is concentration, classical form of meditation, developing a certain, let's say, one-pointedness. So Saturn, the planet of discipline, trying to integrate discipline with your spiritual practice, your Piscean practice. And discipline, what that means is basically doing what you don't feel like doing, And Saturn's also our ability to resist temptation, the ability to show up for a friend when you said you would, for example. These are Saturn things. Because Saturn runs counter to the natural desires of the monkey. Okay? So the prescription, and really part of that great work, is trying to discipline ourselves and to integrate that into our mystical practice, whatever that means for you. Because a challenge with Pisces energy sometimes is it can be a little diffuse, a little bit spacious and lacking in focus. And Saturn says, okay, it's challenging, but let's bring it into focus. And let's not to succumb to the desires of the moment and the appetites. That's why a very Saturnian, Piscean practice is austerity. Not to succumb to appetites. Fasting would be an example of a great spiritual practice to try this month as a prescription. Because that sort of practice will help you to gain clarity within the meditative state. So austerity is part of it, but also meditations that focus on concentration. Where you're focusing the mind on a certain thing. Whether it's a certain chakra or a candle lit in your room or, concentrating on the space between the thoughts. Concentration meditations are some of the more classical forms. And it's a very Saturnian process. Now, returning to this idea of the challenge is the lines are blurring between what is real and not real. Okay. And then the current great work of humanity is to wake up amidst, these illusory states of consciousness. Well, since we're talking about consciousness, meditation, mystical training, this is perhaps an oversimplification, but I find it a useful way of framing it, is that usually you'll find in the esoteric mystery schools of the world and spiritual schools, two different types of teachings. You have the energy-based systems, like, for example, Kundalini Yoga, Taoist Qigong, Mopai out of India. Many of the Eastern schools will focus on the energy-based systems. Not all of them, obviously, but many of them. Kriya Yoga is another energy-based system. And then you have the more consciousness-based system, more like Hermeticism, more like Christian mysticism, or Egyptian Coptic Christianity, or Rudolf Steiner, or Rosicrucianism, which, there's many different ways to have a consciousness school and an energy-based school, but the general rule is the energy-based schools focus on the energy within the body. They call it prana, life force, chi. Arhatic yoga would be another example of an energy-based system where they're focusing on building up and moving the energy through the body. Will often focus, at least at first, on the lower chakral centers to build up that energy. So that's an energy-based system. And then the consciousness-based system is meditations that tend to focus on the head center and to open up the third eye and stuff like this, but then focus on meditation techniques that aren't so much energy-based, but focusing the mind through concentration, and one's capacity to observe reality is very much focused on mind training. Again, oversimplification, but often these schools will fall in one of the two categories, and they'll be deficient in the other category. And they might even view the other category as a waste of time or not a part of the spiritual path. Again, not always the case, but it's a common thing you'll see if you're in this world for very long. And the whole reason I'm talking about this is Saturn, as I referenced, one of the archetypes being the scientist. Science in consciousness does tend to focus a little bit more on the consciousness-based systems as having a greater benefit for folks now. I'll give you a quick story. This is a true story. Back in the 1920s or 30s, we had the famous guru come to the West, Paramahansa Yogananda. He wrote the book Autobiography of a Yogi. Wonderful book. I highly recommend it for those of you who are interested in mysticism. And he was a very powerful guru. And he came over and he spread the word of Kriya Yoga and taught people very powerful energy-based meditation techniques. And I honor his work. He's a great dude. And then you had also, simultaneously, the more consciousness-based system, which really focus on developing the power of the mind. Like Rosicrucianism was very popular then, still is today. Hermeticism, Rudolf Steiner was doing his thing, So they were, paralleling each other, two very different approaches at the same time. And right around the 1930s, Hitler and Mussolini were, doing their thing and rising to power, and the Nazi Party was gaining traction. And the people from the consciousness schools were adamantly warning everybody about the dangers of fascism and what was going on with the Nazi Party. And they were talking about it all the time, warning people, this is dangerous. This is leading down a path of destruction. The consciousness schools cutting through falsehood and illusion to truth. Meanwhile, Yogananda, in I think 1934, he was interviewed in a magazine. You can find it online if you look for it, where he was praising Mussolini as having a great mind. And he even talked about how he implanted a thought into Hitler's head to invade Russia to the east. Like, he was really propping up the whole thing and preaching it and talking about it in a positive light. Now, I think it's safe to say Yogananda was absolutely wrong. No argument there, Now, the cheap shot I don't want to take here is that, therefore, consciousness-based systems are better than energy-based systems, because energy-based systems, people who are involved in that can't tell the difference between truth and falsehood. That's not true. I don't believe that. I think both systems are important to work with simultaneously. And actually, I do teach this through my website. I call it Consciousness Coaching, where I teach a very holistic, comprehensive approach to spiritual development, where I use both very powerful meditation techniques from both. But anyhow, I also don't want to disparage or talk down on Yogananda. Obviously, he was wrong about that. He was in an illusory state. I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. But he had great gifts and powers through the energy-based system that most people can never even dream of. So, everybody makes mistakes. I'm not trying to paint him as a bad person or a false guru. But I am mentioning that, both of these systems are incomplete unto themselves, and they both have certain strengths and blinders, so it's important to work them both. So in my opinion, a consistent, rigorous, Saturnian, mystical or spiritual practice, Pisces or Virgo too, through service, is probably the most powerful way to work with these energies, really throughout Saturn's entire transit through the sign of Pisces. And this is just a sneak preview of Saturn and Pisces and what it has to offer and what it feels like experientially. Because yes, it's highlighted now by the full moon, but this is only going to grow in strength and power, especially in 2025 and 2026, when Saturn meets up with Neptune in the sky. Neptune rules Pisces. Here it is in its own sign. When it meets up with Saturn, everything I've been talking about here is going to get even stronger. Again, this is only the beginning, so it's good to get a head start now. This is the full moon moment, shining a spotlight on the Saturn, reminding us, it's like, okay, here's the work. Here's the prescription. Let's roll up my sleeves and practice discipline towards this goal, to ultimately raising our consciousness, to what? To attain a more ultimate truth. There's the great work. And also a more positive expression of Saturn and Pisces, and what we're trying to achieve here is cutting through the more deceptive quality of Pisces to concretize truth into the world through this more self-sacrificial energy associated with Pisces. Yes, the mystic, but it's also the martyr energy, where we hang ourselves on the cross self-sacrificially for truth. Over the next couple of years, this time frame, I've said this before, I'll say it again, it's a period of time where the whistleblower will be prominent for sure. Okay, so keep your eyes out for that as well. Truth trying to come out. Hanging oneself on the cross for the ultimate truth. Now, in regards to consciousness training, as I said, Saturn in Pisces puts more of an emphasis on that. Meditation, more focused on training the mind, working with the upper chakral centers, training the mind to concentrate, to observe, to introspect, to monitor one's thoughts, be more aware of that, okay? With the goal being to cut through directly to truth, to realize we're in the matrix, so to speak, and to get out of that illusory state. So these are the core evolutionary intentions, with the goal being to expand our consciousness. Now, there's many meditation techniques out there. It may be hard to tell which is energy-based, which is consciousness-based. You kind of have to experience them yourself and figure that out for yourself. The meditations I do on this channel often are a mixture of both. The meditation I'm going to do today is very much focused on consciousness development from the School of Consciousness. Actually, the original person that created it was Rudolf Steiner, a very advanced mystic, and this is my adaptation of it. Enjoy. Let's begin by focusing on your breath. And slowly inhale through your nose deep into your belly, and then feel your lungs expand. And then exhale from your belly first. Always belly first. Deep, rhythmic, comfortable breathing. And make the in-breath and the out-breath as long as you can. That's comfortable for you. And match the length of time of the in-breath perfectly with the out-breath. In, out. And we're going to start by doing a focus technique that will sink you into a deep meditative state. And bring your conscious awareness all the way down to your left toes. Feel all of the toes in your left foot. Feel like you're in your toes of your left foot. And this is a little bit harder, but try to feel the toenails of your left foot. And focus on them entirely. And now move your awareness up through the balls of your left foot and spread into the center of your left foot, in the back of the left foot, up into the ankle, up through the calf muscle and the shins, into your left knee, and now your left thigh, and feel all the tissues of your left thigh soften and let go. And now up into your left hip, and now focus on your entire left leg. Now move your attention to all of your right toes. And feel like you're in the toes of your right foot. Now feel the toenails of your right foot. And slowly move up into the right foot. Now up into the right ankle. Up through the right calf and shins. The right knee. and slowly melt into your right thigh. The right hip now. And now feel the entirety of your right leg. Now feel both legs at the same time. Now bring your awareness to your pelvic floor. And the tailbone. Now up into your lower back. If you feel any tension in your lower back, just breathe into it. Feel the tissues let go and relax. Now up into the middle back, up into the upper back, the scapula, the vertebrae of the upper back, the shoulders. Now go up and over your shoulders, down past your clavicle, and into the chest area. Feel the tissues of your chest expand as you inhale. Now feel the heart. And see if you can feel your heartbeat. It's very subtle. Connect with the pulse of life. Down through towards your stomach and solar plexus. Feel all the organs in the stomach area, the spleen, the liver, the intestines, the gallbladder. On your next inhale, your awareness goes up again through the chest area and over to the right shoulder. And the right upper arm, right elbow, right forearm, right wrist, and the right hand. Now the right fingers and fingertips, and feel the fingernails of your right hand. Now up through the right arm and across your chest over to the left shoulder. Down through the upper arm of the left arm, left elbow, left forearm, left wrist, left hand, left fingers, left fingernails. On the next inhale, raise your awareness up through your left arm into your neck area and feel the front of your neck and resist the urge to swallow. Just stay present with all the muscles and tissues of the front of your neck. Now wrap around the back of the neck, up into the back of the skull. Feel both of your ears, up to the top of your head, and down through the forehead. Feels nice and warm. And your eyebrows, eyelashes, eyelids, and your eyes. Feel the bundle of nerves that goes from your eyes to the center of your brain. Feel those nerves relax. Down through your nose, your upper lip, your cheeks, your chin, your lower lip, your mouth, and your tongue. And just inside the skull, this is the point known as the third eye. And focus your attention there. And feel as though you're moving into the center of the center of the center of that point. Almost as if you're moving through a wormhole. But your attention point isn't moving, it's staying stationary. In between the eyebrows, just behind the skull. Focus there. But feeling like you're moving into the center of that point. And as you do this, I'm going to guide you through a breathing routine that will increase the power of this meditation. It involves a 3-second inhale, a nice quick full breath, followed by a 6-second exhale, nice and slow, but a full exhale. And then we're going to hold the breath for 12 seconds after the out breath, and I'll guide you through it. And we're about to begin, so do a nice full exhale at this point. And now let's begin. Inhale, nice and full, deep breath, and now exhale, slower, nice and full. And now hold the breath, and as you're holding the breath, focus on that point in the third eye, moving into the center of the center of the center of that point. And now inhale, nice and full, deep breath, and exhale. Slowly exhale, and hold the breath, and focus on the center of the center of the center of that point between your eyebrows. And now inhale quickly and nice and full, and exhale slower, Nice full exhale. And hold the breath. Focus on the center of the center of the center of that point between the brow. Focus there. And now inhale nice and full. And exhale slower, letting all the breath out. And now hold the breath as you focus on the center of the center of the center of that point between the brow, just inside the skull. And now inhale nice and full and exhale slower. And hold the breath as you focus on the center of the center of the center of that point between the brow. And now inhale nice and full breath and exhale slower, fully. And hold the breath as you focus on the center of the center of the center of that point between the brow. And inhale nice and full and exhale slower. Nice and full exhale, and hold the breath, focusing on the center of the center of the center of that point between the brow. And inhale nice and full and exhale slower but fully. And hold the breath as you focus on the center of the center of the center on that point between the brow. And now return to normal breathing. And allow your awareness to spread through every cell of your body. And just observe. How do you feel? What is the experience of you like right now? What does that feel like? And just experience it. Observe. And experience this spaciousness of consciousness for a few more breaths, and then I'll come back. Very slowly and gently begin to feel the environment around you and slowly shift your physical body. Take your time, and whenever you're ready, open your eyes.